They called it the Mute, not its real name. Nobody knew its real name. The registration plate had corroded off the hull sometime in the 11 years it had been sitting in Depot Kelsara's back lot, wedged between a gutted ore hauler and a pile of condemned pressure struts nobody had gotten around to scrapping. The Mute was what the salvagers called it, because it wouldn't answer, wouldn't open, wouldn't bleed a signal, leak a pressure reading, or twitch a single indicator light for anyone who came near it with a scanner. I cooked for those salvagers. 3 years on Kelsara, feeding 42 men and women their breakfast, their midday, their supper. I knew every face in that depot. I knew who took their coffee black, who couldn't eat before noon, who snuck a second portion of flatbread and pretended they hadn't. I was not an engineer. I was not an archaeologist. I held no academic license, carried no survey credentials, and had never in my life operated anything more technical than an industrial range hood. I knew the Mute the way you know a piece of furniture, as something that occupied space. By the time I arrived at Kelsara, the ship had already beaten 5 separate salvage teams. Military-grade cutting torches had burned themselves to stub against its hull plating without leaving a mark. 3 decryption rigs had crashed, trying to handshake with a port that looked active but returned nothing readable. A xenolinguist from the Colonial Survey had spent 4 months cataloging the glyphs etched along the ship's lower spine, before concluding they matched no known script family in the database, pre-divergence probably, which put the ship at somewhere north of 9,000 years old, maybe 11. The xenolinguist packed her bags and left. The depot administrator filed the Mute under pending reanalysis and stopped spending budget on it. The ship sat, the lot filled up with other work. The Mute became, in the practical life of the depot, a place to lean things. I used to eat my lunch there because the hull's dorsal surface was flat and elevated just enough to get me out of the foot traffic between the machine bays. I'd climb up on a cable spool, step across to the top of the strut pile, and haul myself up onto the hull with my tray. There was a low ridge about 2/3 of the way down the ship's back, where the plating had warped slightly outward, and it made a natural seat. I'd sit there with my back to the ridge and eat and watch the depot work, without being part of it for 20 minutes. It was the best 20 minutes of my day. I'd been doing it for almost a year when the ship spoke. I want to be precise about what happened, because I've told this story enough times to know how easy it is for people to round it into something dramatic. There was no ritual. There was no ceremony. I was holding a bowl of cold soup with both hands because the tray kept sliding, and I'd put my right palm flat on the hull to steady it, and I sat down. That was it, palm on the hull, full weight, settling in. The ship went warm under my hand. Not hot, warm. The specific warmth of something alive that has been very cold for a long time and is only now remembering how to hold heat. I felt it move up through my palm and into my wrist before I understood it was happening. I looked down. The plating under my hand was lit. Not glowing, lit from within, the way embers look before they catch. A line of script was rising through the metal, like heat rises through water, slow and inevitable, the characters brightening from dark violet to gold as they ran outward from the point where my skin met the hull. They ran in every direction, across the dorsal ridge, down both flanks, around the bow curve, the entire visible surface of the ship illuminated in the same spreading script. My soup hit the ground. I don't remember dropping it. The hatch opened below me. Not forced, not cut, not blown, not pried. It unsealed from inside. I heard the locks disengage, 4 of them in sequence, each one a low, clean sound, like a large key turning in a well-made mechanism. The hatch swung outward on hinges that had not moved in 11,000 years, and moved without a sound, without a catch, without a tremor, as if it had only been waiting for someone to be ready. I climbed down. I stood in front of the open hatch for a long time. Then I went in. The interior was cold and clean. Whatever atmosphere the ship maintained had kept the passage of years from touching anything inside. The corridor was narrow, by the standards of modern hulls, high-ceilinged, the walls lined with the same illuminated script that ran the exterior, dimmer here, pulsing slowly in that same gold-violet cadence. My boots made no sound on the deck. The material absorbed it, or the ship was simply too large for my single set of footsteps to register in it. I followed the light. There was no other logic available to me. The corridor branched twice, and both times one branch was brighter than the other, and I took the brighter one, and eventually I walked through a set of open blast doors into a chamber that took my breath away. Cryo vaults, rows of them, running the full length of the chamber, each one sealed, each one dark, hundreds. I stood at the entrance and understood, slowly, that this ship had carried people, that whatever catastrophe or journey or exile had sealed it and left it drifting had not emptied it before the sealing. The ship had been prepared for the long dark with its crew still aboard, and then something had happened that prevented the waking. 11,000 years of waiting. In the center of the chamber, elevated on a low dais, stood a single terminal. Unlike everything else aboard, it was not dormant. It had been running, I realized, running for 11,000 years, on whatever power source the hull contained, waiting for the access condition to be met. I crossed the chamber and stood before it. The terminal spoke, not in a language I knew. The sounds were not human sounds as I understood them. The tonal register was off, the phonemes shaped by a mouth architecture slightly different from mine. But the ship translated. A second voice emerged beneath the first, flat and precise, the auto-translation function engaging with the smoothness of a system that had been maintained and ready. The original voice spoke 4 syllables. The translation rendered them in standard. The vault knows its blood. I stood there in the middle of that cryo chamber, with 4 words echoing off walls that had heard nothing for 11 millennia, and I tried to understand what had just been said to me. The xenolinguist's notes had called the script pre-divergence. The divergence was the name historians gave to the period roughly 9 to 11,000 years ago, when the earliest human deep space migrations split from the planetary record and became, in the official sense, untracked, lost. The assumption had always been that those early migrations failed, that the ships never arrived or arrived and died, and that humanity's deep space lineage began again from nothing in the centuries that followed. The mute had not failed. It had arrived, and it had waited. I am a cook. I have no formal education beyond a secondary certificate and a food safety license. I do not come from wealth or from a family of any note. I cannot trace my ancestry back more than 3 generations, because the records before my grandmother were lost in a colony fire before I was born. But the ship knew me. Whatever marker it was reading, whatever inheritance moves through blood that no fire can touch and no record can contain, the vault recognized it, and it spoke, and it called me by what I apparently am, which is the last living thread of the line that built this thing 11,000 years ago. I stood in that chamber for a long time after the terminal went quiet. Then I walked back up the corridor and out through the hatch into the afternoon light of the depot, and I sat down on the cable spool below the hull, and I looked at the ship. The glyphs still burned on its surface, gold-violet and patient, the way they had burned before anyone was alive to see them. The depot was still running around me. A loader crossed the far lot. Someone called out a parts number from one of the machine bays. The ordinary noise of ordinary work, unchanged. I was not unchanged. I went back inside before anyone else noticed the hatch was open. There were things in that cryo chamber that had waited 11,000 years for their bloodline to come home, and they had not yet been told that she had arrived. I figured that was my job to do.